Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big funding. I'm your host, Greg Head, and this week my guest is Roy Vandenbroek, the founder and CEO of Rentman Software. He's based in Utrecht, south of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And he started in the Netherlands and built a pan-European company and now sells all over the world. He's built up software for the festival and live event and streaming service and media services to manage for all those companies that manage equipment that shows up to put on a concert or a festival or an event, which is a massive industry, a big niche, as Roy describes it. But he came out of that industry and built a software company that is now over 100 employees and growing faster post-COVID and survived that. He also raised a round of growth equity to take some money off the table and grow a little bit faster. He's a humble and successful CEO of a European software company. Hi, Roy. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast.
Hi.
Hello. You didn't reveal a little bit of your accent. Where are you today, Roy?
I'm based in Utrecht, that's the Netherlands.
Yeah, the Netherlands. Excellent. And you've got an amazing software company that you and your team have built for the industry you grew out of here. Let's just start with what is Rentman, or Rentman, is you probably call it there. How do you pronounce
Yeah.
that for you
We
inside
call
the
we,
building?
we call it Rentman. It came from rental management,
Ah,
and
okay.
we started the business also outside of a rental company. So
Yeah,
we started with helping rental companies, and now we
yeah.
call ourselves the operation management platform for the media and the live events industry. So basically, we help everybody that's making a media or an event, and we help them with the logistics and the crew and the equipment.
Okay. So another one of those software products that powers, let's say, a hidden industry. We go to concerts and festivals and we see the speakers and the lights and the soundboards and all that. We don't actually see them. We kind of ignore them. But you came out of that industry and your software powers that universal business, right? Live
Yeah,
events
yeah.
and you
At,
say media as well, so there's all kinds of variations of that these days. Is that about the size of it here across
yeah,
Europe and around the
yeah.
world?
100%, yeah. So we are active around the world, so around 100 countries. And I think what you say, right? It's great to realize that once you go into a big festival, that a month ago there was probably like an empty field, nothing on it. And if you go to the bigger ones in the Netherlands, they have around 700 vendors that bring something, either
Yeah,
trussing or catering, to actually make something out of that. And the same goes for media, right? So if you have, if you have a performance, and then you need a lot of things that aren't there naturally. People need to bring it, and we help them plan that.
what's an example of let's say, a non-concert, non-festival outdoor event? What is an example of a media?
Well, so basically, all the bigger broadcasting events
Ah,
are done with production crews that are flying in just for that event, right?
I
So
see.
last week we had Eurovision here in the Netherlands, or sorry, in
Uh-huh.
Europe,
Hmm.
and then they bring these big trucks, 28 cameras in that venue just for that show, and it all needs to be planned.
Right. Well, isn't that interesting? The industry is in the entertainment and media industry, as large as that is here. When we attend something, we see the 3 or 5 or 10 people on stage, and we ignore the 100 or 300 people that are working on this, that made it all happen, that ship in and all this rental stuff. I guess it's a rental kind of business that kind of pops up and
Yeah,
goes back, and all this stuff
yeah,
is hauled off and on. Is it mostly rental type equipment for these, let's say,
yeah.
festivals and concerts?
So the equipment travels from show to show, right? So that
Yeah,
makes it rental. And then the difficulty is in planning what needs to go where, because there are no fixed sets. Every festival, every event is custom. So you have to
yeah,
plan where it goes. But the equipment is only one side. The crew to operate it and the logistics to get it there, that's the other side of the business. So to give you an idea, again, this festival that I spoke, they have 2,500 people on site in the production process just to make it happen.
right.
And it all needs to plan.
That's amazing, and it sounds complicated and unique. It isn't like any other type of industry. So let's say you couldn't use typical software to manage this complicated thing. So I imagine it was all
That's what we tell as well. Yeah,
spreadsheets.
only our
Yeah.
software works.
Yeah. So let's explain Rentman to everyone here. What kind of functions does it do, organizing these, you know, teams and their equipment?
When the first request comes to a typical customer of ours, then they get a request to organize, let's say, or to facilitate a festival. Then they start with the financial part, make a quote. The quote get accepted, and then they need to basically plan all the equipment, the dispatching in the warehouse, and plan the crew. And it runs until the post production where we do the invoicing and check if all the costs are actually there. Everything is flowed back, and then time is registered. That's
Okay.
basically what we do.
Well, that sounds pretty simple, but even just making a quote is a lot of planning, a lot of equipment, a lot of pricing. I mean, it's not a simple quote, right? How many
Yeah,
PA speakers and right, yeah,
yeah,
soundboards and whatever. Yeah.
especially when availability comes into play, right? So you have only a fixed stock of your warehouse, but you need to cater multiple events with that. So you cannot always decide which
Uh-huh.
goes where. You need sub rentals, and all that needs to be done in the financial part because it comes with different costs. So you want to know what your margin is.
And do you get into the, let's say, the marketplace of if you don't have the equipment, here are people that you can rent nearby, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And if you don't have
Yeah.
the team, here are contractors that can help you set it up and manage it. And you
Yeah,
do all,
for
yeah.
sure, for sure.
Okay.
So we have developed Rent from a friend. So if both companies are using Rentman, then they use our software as an interface for sub rents. So we do that already on the equipment side, and we see a lot of potential on the crew side as well. So we're working towards that, where
Okay.
our software becomes the platform for all your crew. We have some exciting plans in the making for this year to also launch it.
Okay. So you're still going, doing exciting things. It's been a while. We'll talk about that. How many people and customers in the business these days, this year in 2025?
Yeah, so we're right now with 120 people, so 120 employees,
Wow.
and we have around 250,000 users.
And the users are not the contract people themselves, or does that include that? Meaning they have to get on the app to, you know, help out in an event, or does that include just the people who are using the software to organize all that?
Yeah, so we sell to the vendor that actually provides all that equipment or the crew, and
Yeah.
everybody that works on the event that's planned with our software we count them as a user.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Well, it's a huge, let's say hidden industry here, and you knew about that. Can you say about how much revenues you have now for 120 employees based
yeah,
in
so
the
the goal
Netherlands?
is to end this year at 15 million, 1 5.
Okay, yeah, very 15 million euro, I guess, or
That's euro, yeah.
okay, great. So a little bit more in dollars. Very exciting. And last year, 2024, you raised a growth equity round. A little bit of funding for the business, presumably a little secondary and de-risk for the founders after a long time as you building this steady business. What can you say about? I guess it was Expedition Capital, European-based growth equity. But what can you say about your growth equity round?
Yeah, so I think the key here that you say you build a steady business, but I think what you need to realize that we raised in 2024 and what happened in the few years before 2024, namely COVID,
Yeah.
did make our business that was based on the event industry not a typically steady business,
Yes.
right?
Uh-huh.
So and that was a important pivot point where it got us thinking, okay, we built something, we're on a good track. COVID came and we really saw our traditional event industry really dropping. At that point, we were able to make the pivot to get more into the media space because everybody
Ah,
was renting cameras, getting
okay. Yeah.
the online live streaming going. So we were able to recover some of our traditional event revenue with the pivot to more the media industry. But long term, that helped that made us realize, okay, we got those two horses into play now. That basically means to double our marketing cost.
Yeah.
But also, personally, the secondary was a big was a big factor in this because there were a few months where we saw everything trending downwards. I was very worried
Mhm.
that we were going bankrupt.
Yeah.
And then I realized, okay, I worked 8 years on this. yeah, it's what did I gain out of it? So they planted the seed. Maybe if this all over and we're still alive, I need to secure something for myself,
Yeah.
and we really, yeah, went that route then.
Yeah. And are you the sole founder? I'm sure you have a leadership team with 120 employees, but do you have a co-founder or co-founding team?
Yeah, so I founded it myself in my rental company, and quite early in the process, a friend from the university joined. He's currently still the CTO, and he has some shares in the company as well.
Yeah, great. Can you share how much you raised from Expedition Capital based in
Yeah,
London?
22 million.
Okay,
That's
great.
and that's
Well,
dollars.
congratulations. And growth equity is still pretty practical. It's not a crazy bet imagining you're going to AI and become a unicorn in 3 years. And, the stateside VC capital game that's happening right now, the practical growth equity game. I've talked to Will Sheldon in London, and they're kind of playing the classic growth equity game, which is some support for the founders in the funding and then a little growth capital, not too much, and
Yeah.
then practical growth and help. So we'll talk about how you're working with Will and team there. Is your company growing and profitable right now, or are you
Yeah.
investing for growth, or how's that
Yeah.
going?
Yeah. So we're growing, so over 30% a year,
Yeah,
profitable, and
great.
we have the money on the bank to make some more bolder bets and to fund some things that we couldn't do before.
Right. Well, we'll talk about that. It's really exciting. Not everybody who grows a great software business to 10 million survives COVID does the growth
Yeah.
equity thing. And I know that you have not a unique, but you've got your own way of running the business, very product driven and very focused. That's made it successful. Not everybody wants to get investors and change the game a little bit. So we'll talk about that. Very exciting. Is your team all over the world or mostly in Europe or the Netherlands?
Yeah, so we started in the Netherlands, and I think it's interesting to realize that the Netherlands is only a country of 16 million people, right? So
Hmm.
1/6. And we are in this we still think it's quite a big niche, but it is a niche.
Yeah.
So quite early in our journey, I think already in the second or the third year, we realized that if we want to make this a bit bigger or we want to make it big, then we had to start hiring international. So I think in the first 5 hires, already more than half of the team was international. But we managed until I think 80 people to keep hiring that in Utrecht
Yeah.
in the Netherlands. It's a university town, a lot of international students. Those people tend to stay, so we were able to get some international people to help us out with sales support, everything that needs in native language. That was working in Europe, but when we made the start selling in the US, of course the time difference was too big,
Hmm.
and then we made the deliberate choice to start an office in Toronto.
Oh, great.
So nowadays, the majority of our people are in Utrecht. We have some people remote in Europe, and we have a second office in Toronto, Canada.
Great. And you're in your website, your marketing, and your product. Is your product in multiple languages as well?
Yeah, yeah. Again, we wouldn't be able to survive just in it with a Dutch website.
Yeah.
We our first real salesperson that we hired him specifically for the German market.
Yes, of course.
uh, Already in this we didn't have the hiring process that we have today, and then so once we hired him, signed the contract, he was in the first week, he took on the phone. We realized that his German wasn't as good as we had checked in the process. So we quickly moved him to a more support role and hired two more Germans. But I think this international thing, language wise translations, from day on we made sure that we need to support that, otherwise just were not able to grow.
Yeah. Well, some software, maybe like Basecamp, project management for whatever, digitally technical people can survive a long way with in English these days. So it didn't used to be that way 20 years ago. But when you're going to Germany and you're dealing with, 1,000 people who are helping an event, most of them probably don't speak English very well. And so you have to have a German app,
Yeah.
on all
100%, and
sides of it. And
that still is the case, right? So we once, I think a year ago, we checked, is it still required for us to do all our translations in 7 or 8 different languages? So
wow.
we did a small survey, and then we realized that in big parts of Europe, the majority of our users still don't speak English to the
Yeah.
extent that they were able to buy from us if we didn't
Yeah.
do it in their native language.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's another layer of complexity, right? Selling across country, selling in multiple languages, and
Yeah.
all of that.
But it's also a big part of the fun that we had, because already from the early days, the culture is very different within the company as it was when we went for only Dutch
Mm,
people. So I
right.
think that makes our company quite unique, that we were so culturally different, because all those people bring different ways of thinking, different perspectives.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right. So not just language, there's different perspectives. And is the equipment and rental business and everything goes around that media, is that relatively the same in the US and North America, Canada, and across Europe and your other regions? I mean, you said about the same, or are there big differences between, say, Germany and the UK even?
I would say there's a big difference between the EU and Europe. And what we also tend to see, that the Belgium and the Netherlands are a bit on the forefront. So a lot of international
Uh-huh.
productions are done by
Yes.
by Belgium or Dutch people, and we
Uh-huh.
can also ride a bit on that wave. And I think
Yeah.
what happened, what we typically saw, is that the productions came bigger in the US when EDM started,
Yeah.
and there were a few Dutch DJs bringing EDM to America, and their production team traveled with those EDM DJs to the US,
Yeah.
and the ecosystem that we had was then built there. And we see the same now happening in the Middle East, where
Okay.
parties were prohibited a few years ago, and now they're really starting to develop
Yeah.
their festive culture, and then the technology that comes with the artist now travels with them. So the Europeans are building their branches there as well.
Wow. Well, it's a very global business for a little company that got started without any outside
Yeah.
funding. Did you have any funding at all, or it was built by you and started to sell and
Yeah,
self-funded?
no, so we didn't have any funding. Of course, I sold my other company at some point, right? So I had my own rental company. That's where I discovered that there was a need for such a software. And at some point, I realized, okay, let's go all into the software. Let's
Yeah.
sell my rental company. So that
Yeah.
had some personal funding. So that also, but that basically allowed me to work for nothing for quite a while. We didn't
Right.
invest that much, because I think from the first day we were always profitable with the software.
Wow. Well, let's go back here. So, you just mentioned you had a rental company. So, this is a classic build software that you could use yourself. And you were a software guy who had this rental business, young guy, I think, right?
Well,
Not too
I
far.
was a rental guy that had some software knowledge. I think that's the right order.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's,
Yeah.
yeah, software
Yeah.
curious back in the
Software
day.
curious. Yeah.
Yes, right. So, how long did you run this rental company to support all these festivals and concerts?
I think I had that from around 7 or 8 years, but I
Yeah.
think it started really early. So when I was 18 and I was allowed to drive, I bought a first van, and it first started as a DJ. I think
Hmm.
this is you have the classical SaaS founder story,
Yeah.
but you also have the classical rental company story, where basically everybody starts as
Everybody's
a
a DJ.
DJ,
Yeah.
then realize that they want to be that much in the spotlight, but rather be a bit more behind the stage, uh, have more interest in the equipment than in the people, start buying more equipment and hiring DJs, and then before you know it, you have a warehouse filled with equipment, and then you look to yourself, okay, what am I going to do with all the equipment? Well, let's rent it out.
Okay.
Uh, so it's quite a typical story, and my story isn't that different from the majority of rental companies that are out there.
Right. Did you make software for your own company when it was running? That's a pretty classic story here on the
Yeah,
Practical Founders
yeah.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was around 2010, and that I think was also when the
Okay.
SaaS really
Hmm.
started to develop. I had a background in computing science, studied at the university here, and I was really annoyed by the fact that for my coding there was no software, and everything that was for inventory was on premise. And I just started to build something, managed to sell that to some of the peers that we worked with, because I think it's good to realize, as I just told you, that these events are quite big, and you also need like multiple sub brands or other equipment or other companies to help you to
Uh-huh.
support all these events. You have
Right.
freelancers, so you have quite a big network, companies that you work closely with. So I was also able to sell that software to those companies. and then we went from there basically.
So how long did you have some form of software that worked for you for quoting? Maybe it started there, and that you were running it inside your business. Was that a 4 or 5 years you were building this software up, I guess, and had somebody on your team building it, or you were building it?
I was building it myself, yeah. And I think in the first 3 years, really, there was no ambition to roll out that
Right.
software. It was just to scratch my own itch and just to make sure that I could make my quotes faster,
Yeah.
and also, of course, had some fun while building it. But when we started also selling it out, the ambition wasn't to build this global company,
Yeah.
the number one in the events that we are
Yeah.
nowadays. That developed over time.
Yeah. So it started with, I need something for quotes, and you build it, and there's a really big network. This industry is very well connected. I think word spread, and people said, "How did you do that?" and "Can I buy it?" and so forth. And, did you have customers of the software while you were still running your rental
Yeah,
business and doing
yeah,
this
yeah.
thing? Yeah.
Yeah. So the first 100 customers, I was
Okay.
I was doing both, right? So building the software, selling it, and having my rental company on the side.
So you got to 100 customers building it yourself and selling it yourself
Yeah.
with this
Yeah.
other business.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
at some point, so there I decided to sell my rental company, and then I
Yes.
think the first 300-400 customers I sold myself while
Yeah.
building it also myself, and then I started hiring a team.
Okay. So now you have, if you look at the Rentman website, is it Rentman.io? Is that what it is? Yeah.
Yeah, that's our
So
website.
you could see all the things you do, right? The big suite of software, and you can start with any one of the tools, I think, right? And not just quoting, or you don't have to buy the
Yeah.
big system,
Yeah.
which is very practical and supportive of your customers here. But the first thing was quoting, right? And what was the second thing around that? Is this the modules or whatever you would say
Well,
grew up?
so you have to realize that when you quote something, you are basically quoting inventory
Ah,
and crew, right? So quoting was a need, but I was not able to
yes,
quote something without building the inventory or the crew
yes,
part. And that's still the entry point. So
yeah,
if you come to us, to our platform, then you're either interested in your inventory problems, or your crew, and basically
mhm,
probably also need to quote or invoice that. But these two products are still our entry point, and that didn't change.
okay. So you had an up and running software company. Can you say about, I don't know if it's the same, but like how much did a customer pay you per year back in the day? So that would have been 2015 or so, something like that
Yeah.
when you.
Yeah. So I think we can fill a whole podcast of all the mistakes that we made. And
Okay,
I think
there we
one of
go.
them, yeah, there we go. Now let's kick it off with the first one. So our
Yeah.
first pricing was not user based. It was just a flat fee. So we charged
Ah, okay.
74 euros
Yeah. A year
for
or a month?
a month. A
Okay,
month.
great. Yeah.
But then we found ourselves in a sales process of this typical company like myself that I always had in mind when I developed that price, selling it to a big national
Yes.
radio station that wanted to go with 20 users, which at that time for me was a very big amount
Yeah,
of
big.
users, also paying 74 euros. But and then I realized, okay, this pricing didn't make sense. And now you would say that that's a very stupid mistake, and that of course also is the case, but that was also the early days of SaaS, right? So
Yeah.
so there weren't that many SaaS products out there that user-based pricing is as default as it is now, or at least
Yeah.
in my reality back then.
Yeah. Well, and you were passionate about your own rental company making software. Were you, I don't know, looking at software companies and wanted to be software companies? And if you're in a big city here in the States or London, there's funding and communities. And were you looking at all of that on the web and saying, I want to be in this SaaS game? Or were you just building something that was great for your customers?
Yeah, I wish I could say that from the beginning I had this vision and I worked relentlessly
Oh, right.
towards
Yes.
that vision with smaller steps, and it was
When
all
you get
but
to 100 million, you could say, I knew what I was talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, but for sure not, right? So I was just taking it like month by month, seeing, okay, what like I just wanted to build something great. I really was passionate about that industry, and I was every
Yeah.
day looking at what can we do to make it better, to either sell it a bit more, or what can we do to improve the product. And we always went from there, and we never had the ambition to become a very big software company until, well, we were a considerably sized software company.
Yeah. Well, you cared a lot about your customers from the industry you came out of. And it's a little bit like Jason Fried at Basecamp, who says this 3-year plan and big visions and even raising VC funding, which makes you do those kind of things, is kind of useless. How about you go through the next sprint and build the next best
Yeah,
thing that's awesome for your
yeah,
customers?
yeah,
That's pretty much all you're going to do anyway. So why don't you just focus on that?
yeah.
Did you, I don't know, did you look at software companies, maybe Basecamp and Jason Fried
No,
and others as models, or you were out there just building this thing?
yeah, the last, right?
Yeah.
I also never went to conferences or checked it out. No, no, no.
Yeah. Good
We
for
were
you.
just
Very
building.
practical. Um,
Yeah,
uh, and you had a little team to start. You got rid of your rental company and you had a software company. Did you have a team to start, or did you get, with an engineer and I don't know what else?
yeah. We back in the days we counted that roughly every 3,000 MRR or 4,000 MRR we could hire somebody.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I was always making the plan. Okay, I need X many customers to get to the next milestone. What is it that I need the most now? Right.
Yeah.
So that's how I was basically every quarter deciding, okay, the next hire should be a sales or a marketeer or an engineer. So
Yeah.
we developed all those teams quite in parallel,
Yeah.
without any like bigger steps. Just every time the moment the money was there, we did the next hire.
Right. So what kind of business was it and is it now? It sounds like a very, let's say, industry focused. The word was spreading amongst your customers. They'd go to your website. They could buy and use the software, at least try it or get a free trial. That's still on your website. Was it kind of a marketing and product led kind of business with a little sales if somebody wanted to buy a lot, or it's not very enterprisey, big company sales, big ticket.
No, I think you can say it's quite product led.
Yeah.
I think it also comes a bit from the nature of these event guys, right? They are always in the dark. They don't want to be seen. They want to be the guys on the background,
They're
and
technical.
they're technical. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the case. Going with big fancy slide decks never really worked for me. But what really worked for me is showing that you really care about them. Right? So it is
Yeah.
really industry focused, because what we do well, what we hope to do well, is that we really understand them, right?
Yeah.
Because then if we really understand their problems, we can develop the best solution. And I think it's always been the case that we showcase that we really understand their pain
Ah,
points, and that comes from either just showing it in the software, hey, this is probably what you have, and this is how you can solve it, by also being so centralized that all your marketing can highlight those pain points. So I think
yes.
that's the reason why we stick to this industry, because that's for us the competitive advantage.
No, it's the magic of vertical, especially deep verticals and big niches, as you describe it, right? It's so different from anything else. So when somebody shows up and says, I've been there, I bet in your business, we made the software, it's grown up. I bet you have this problem in this way, and let me demo that. And you can
Yep.
probably go a long way before they say, they ask a question. They're probably saying, exactly, 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 that kind of thing. And
Yep.
does that make sense?
Yeah,
You were
that's
doing
100%
that?
how we did it. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
and it was and back now, so right, still in the days, we don't do outbound sales, or like we don't really get it working. Majority of our leads come from the community. So
Yeah.
we have the huge advantage that indeed you work together with different companies on
Uh-huh.
these bigger
Right,
projects.
the spreading happens, right,
That's
and people
running. Yeah.
take it.
Yeah.
How come you're not using Rentman? Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
that.
and we have those advantage of the network effect from those freelancers. So those
Mhm.
freelancers work at multiple companies. Since the event industry is so seasonal, freelancers play a very big role, and they're also spreading our word because they need to be on
Yes.
our app, etc.,
Okay.
etc. So and
Okay.
then
Well,
from
that's
there,
interesting.
people,
So in this two-sided freelancer, you know, uh, market or whatever, the freelancers are the ones helping you spread the word. They're working for everybody, right?
yeah,
Saying, "Can you
that's how it
please
is.
get this? It's easier for us when you do this." Very interesting. Okay. Do you actually have salespeople maybe for the larger deals or so forth? Or
Yeah, and still for the also the smaller deals, sales people come in after the trial, right? We still do
okay.
inbound sales.
Yeah.
Um, that's still important. We were not able to close the bigger deals without.
Okay.
But I think right now we have more untouched sales than we do with touch sales.
Okay. Right. So people can buy and use this. And let's say this is not just simple software, right? It's powerful software that runs their business and their projects. And and and
Yeah.
it spits out financials, I guess, to the accounting software and so forth. So they can actually get into the software and play with it enough to see, is this going to work for us? And then a
Yeah.
salesperson follows up and, on occasion, or it's a little
Yeah.
bit larger deal.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Nowadays, a lot of our development capacity goes to making all those setups so that all the complex things seem simple, right? And
Yes,
that's making sure that you really understand the pain points, going that route, and that's where we spend a lot of our development focus to make the complex things seem
right,
simple, so that we don't need those salespeople.
right. So does that mean you have a much higher level of percentage of engineers and product people in your business, right? Since you don't need as many sales and marketers, and if we
Yeah,
make the product better, it'll move faster,
I
that
think
kind of thing.
40% of our budget goes to R&D, and I still think that increasing that budget might help us grow faster than increasing our sales budget.
And is that because you can make the product more accessible and useful for users, and they stay longer and they get sold faster or they get started faster? Or is it because there's just so much to do on the roadmap, the requests from customers to be able to build that? And maybe it's a little bit of both.
Y it is a bit of both, right? Since some people consider it as ERP, we have quite some broad functionalities
Yes.
when it
Uh-huh.
comes to things that touch their business. But I think the majority where we can sell faster is by making more use of those network effects, right? You
Uh-huh.
started already in the beginning, the freelancer marketplace. There are things we can do better. The equipment marketplace. So getting deeper into the ecosystem will help us to sell more from basically the network effects that we can create.
This podcast is brought to you by my friends at Fullscale. 2 years ago, I interviewed three-time software founder Matt Watson on this podcast about his successful practical founder journeys. Matt leveraged offshore software development talent in his last two SaaS companies to staff up quickly and grow efficiently. So for his fourth venture, Matt created Fullscale, one of the fastest growing software development companies in any region. Fullscale vets, employs, and supports over 300 professional software developers and testers in the Philippines who can augment and extend your core dev team. I know several practical SaaS founders who use Fullscale's dev talent to make progress on their products and do it efficiently. Visit fullscale.io to learn why their approach works so well for so many SaaS founders. Now back to our program. This is common for somebody in a business, right? They're using spreadsheets and doing it the old-fashioned way. They look around for software, 2010, and there isn't good software. It's all old software, maybe on-premise software, crappy Windows software, and they say there isn't anything available. I guess I need to build something. But do you have competitors that focus on this big niche, the
Yeah,
rental
more than you
business?
think probably. So we have this Excel file here, and we have identified around 70 competitors that are touching what we do or try to do the same.
And are they new since you started? Were you the pioneer kind of doing this all-in-one kind of solution, or some of them? Do you have any big competitors that sell to the big guys? And I don't know.
So there's quite some of those legacy competitors
Yeah. Okay.
that were there before us. We were the first one doing it on premise. We like to think, at least in sorry, we were the first one tried to sell SaaS in
Hmm.
Europe, and we saw the same happening in the US, right? So we have one competitor in the US that is our main competitor there.
Yeah. And are they funded? Is this a classic little bootstrap guy from Europe who's very savvy about the industry and building an efficient business, competing against VC-funded companies here in the States that are trying to get to Europe and do that? You had any of that?
It's a mixed bag. So
Yeah.
they are funded in multiple ways. So some of them are acquired quite early, part of a bigger ERP offering. Some are riding the rental module based on a bigger
Yeah.
ERP offering and then acquired by the bigger ERP company. Some are bootstrapped, some are VC funded. So we have them across the board.
Right. But you weren't playing the funding game and not trying to be cool or whatever. So was it pretty
Well,
much just following your customers and,
yeah. Well,
aligning that with the
to be
business
honest,
and the
we
efficiency?
we
Yeah.
didn't even realize that was also a path, right? I think the default option here to start a business is at least that's what I always learned
Yeah.
spend the money that you earned,
Yeah.
and while we were so busy in that ecosystem, also in the early days, VC funding never came to
Yeah, of course.
our mind.
Yeah. And, okay, great. So let's go back here. You sold your rental company. You've got software, 100 customers and so forth. Were you very confident that you could make a living, a business, right? Maybe get to €1 million and small team and this is gonna work? Or, was it stressful and, your product was never, up to speed and you never had enough people? How did that
Yeah.
go in the early
Yeah.
days?
Yeah, all of the above, right? So it so there were days when we signed the big customers and we thought we could conquer the world,
Yeah.
and and
Uh,
this is gonna be a great success. But I think especially in the early days, our software had a lot of improvement points. We were
yeah.
always thinking, okay, how can we get this right? We were always it always felt we were a bit behind than where we needed to be, right? We were always one step earlier than what the customers basically wanted us to be,
Yeah.
because we didn't have the funding to build the
Yeah.
teams that support the customers,
Yeah.
how we wanted it.
Yeah. When did you feel like I've got an up and running business? We're in a reasonable zone with customer expectations and what we deliver. We have a team. It's kind of profitable. I can pay myself. When did you feel that? Was that a couple million in revenue or a million?
Yeah, so I'm a really big fan of that book that's called Scaling Up, and
Yeah.
in that book it defines some of these waves that you have, and
Yes.
so there were a couple of times where we really thought, okay, we got it solved. This is how it needs to be, and then your team grows, and then everything falls apart because you don't have the right structure, you don't have the right
Yes.
leadership
Uh-huh.
anymore. You need to
Yeah.
develop, and you need to build a different org structure. So,
Yeah.
and I think in that journey we had three times where everything functioned optimal. That was the part where every time the leadership team had around 7 direct reports,
Hmm.
and then when it get bigger, then you need like intermediate leadership team, but you cannot really afford the people that you want in that position, because that would only make sense if you're way bigger. So every time in those intermediate phases, everything was falling apart.
Yeah.
Um, and now with the after the funding, we are able to go a bit faster and hire the people that we would normally only hire when we were around 20 million. And
Yes.
then now for the first
Get a
time,
little bit ahead of
yeah.
your
Yeah,
pace.
yeah. So this feeling we have now, where we have. So last year we invested really a lot in getting the teams ready. We called it,
Hmm.
bringing more seniority in, and this for me is really a massive change compared
Yes.
to the 10 years before, I have to say.
Yeah. What would you this is very classic and scaling up. Vern Harnish was the classic book. It's probably 15 years old, just over that right now, talking about growing from a small team in any business to a larger team. And a 5-person company operates different than a 30-person
Yeah.
company operates different than a 100-person company, mostly because of that math of leaders and 7 or 8 people that report to them as you described. What were the big inflection points for you? Was that 10 people on the team and then 20 was uncomfortable and then you got to 30 and figured it out, with the management team? And I don't know, what were the inflection points in your business? Can you recall?
I think one was very easy. I had everything under control. My first hire was very challenging because at first needed to be a leader, so I need to
Yeah.
redefine myself there. And I think that well, once I got that figured out, we grow to 10.
Yeah.
Then you need to build a management team.
Hmm.
So we got that figured out. I think when we were around 30, and then the phase from I would say 50 to 80 was really that was really a hard time, I have to say.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
after 80, things got more easier again.
Right. Isn't that interesting, right? And around 80, that's about 10 million in revenue. And you really have to have a factory in the business, products that work, and a way to acquire and get customers on board that's pretty reliable after all that work.
Yeah,
And then you actually have
and
to have a reasonably stable organization, right? With
And
enough
I
management,
think
right?
all the cliches are true, but I think the biggest bottleneck is always at the top, right? Because you really have to redefine yourself
Uh-huh.
across all these journeys.
Yes.
Where because first you know how you're just building that software. That's okay,
Right.
right? You know how to build software. That's working. Then you need to start selling it. You need
Yeah.
to have you need to able to directly coach people and train them, and then you need to work with leaders, which is different than have training
Uh-huh.
or working with direct
Leading
actions. You have to
leaders,
build.
not leading, yes, right? Yeah.
Exactly, right? So that's a different thread. Then you need to find at some point you start calling yourself as a CEO. That comes with different perspective. That comes with different threads. But you need to to be the best version of that in
Hmm.
order for the business to succeed. So I think those years of Rentman was also a personal development
Yeah.
plan.
How did you do that? You weren't going to conferences and reading, the internet about SaaS. This is pretty well-worn path of the scaling up phase. I mean, you read the book there. Did you get help or coaching, or did you just realize, all right, my role has changed. I need to change. I call this changing sports. You're an athlete, but the sport that got you to 10 people won't get you to 30,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
How did you figure that out in yourself and make those transformations?
Yeah, so I didn't have that much help, but I think I realized myself quite often that things didn't work or that I made a mistake. And then I just thought about or spoke to uh, people where I think it was a combination of people. So I think this needs to change. How can I change it? What should I do?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's about making a lot of mistakes, realizing that was a mistake. You need to do something different, or it's not working, and then
Yeah. Is
go
that the
from there.
kind of founder you are that loves the industry that you serve and cares and has a thoughtful approach to the product and your organization, but let's say modestly ambitious. Let's just get to the next level and keep growing. But were you pretty humble about your own abilities and able to see yourself with a lot of myself and most founders, you get clobbered, and somebody needs usually to explain to us what we're missing. But did you seem to find that on your own?
Well, again, if I look back in those, let's say, 10 years where when I really grow Webman to 50 million, there are way more failures that I look back on than
Yeah.
successes, right? So
Yeah.
I also think there's a lot we could do faster, or a lot of things I could have done better to get
Yeah.
here earlier.
Yeah.
I think there's also a lot to be humble about of
Yes.
things that
Okay.
I didn't do so well. So I think that
Yeah.
maybe it's a bit of my how I am, but that's also honestly how I see the world. And I am passionate about this industry, right? But I'm also very passionate right now. I'm a different founder than I was 5 years ago, and now I'm really
Yes.
passionate about okay, how can I still grow faster, right? So
Yeah.
this really it's
How can you
not all.
personally grow faster? Is what you're saying,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
the
So
company? Yeah.
that's a. But I think that if I personally grow fast, then my business also grows faster.
Yes.
So
Right.
I'm there to not only care about the use, but also to get my growth path and make sure that the company can continue this journey, and I get those other milestones as well.
Yeah.
And I think for that, we have to keep going faster because they are further and further away.
Right. Yeah, the game never stops, and you got to keep growing and transforming. It is one reason that practical bootstrap founders, right, that carry all the weight and do it themselves and kind of do it at a pace that they get to make enough mistakes and learn new things. It is one of the reasons they take some growth equity capital. Sure, there's some de-risking, take money off the table, get a little money to get ahead of the game to in a practical way to go a little bit faster. But growth equity has seen this phase, right? The bootstrap founder, right, hanging on to build senior teams, to improve everything in the business, right? And they've kind of that's their focus is that level. And a lot of growth equity shows up with a lot of help. And they're not very prescriptive, but they tend to offer a lot of help. Is that your experience with Expedition that you now have a board and there's people say, and there's a portfolio of their companies and you can hang out with the other founders and they have people who can help you with pricing and recruiting and, all those kinds of things and growing as a CEO? Do they help?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to be on that level and get challenged with the decision that you make, right? So and then
Ah,
they also have skin in the game to ask you,
yes.
hey, are we still doing the right things? I think working with Expedition is great. Uh, really enjoyed the pod so far in that 1 year. But I think the reality is still that you have to grow the company, right? So they can tell you and they can ask you, but don't expect if your expectation is, hey, I'm gonna take growth equity, and then they're gonna bring you advice and they're gonna really help you scale. That's never how I looked at the business. I
Mhm.
think again, you with the team that you have need to grow that company. Of course, you can ask for help, but you can ask any consultant for help.
Yes, okay.
They or you can basically call every company. They don't need per se to be in a portfolio company. For sure, it helps, and lines are shorter. But the reality is, as a team, you have to do it yourself. Nobody knows the business as good as you do or the team does. It's good to have some soundboarding, but they're not gonna do it for us.
Yes. Well, and that's what investors know. They're not gonna they're investing and you're running the business. They're supporting founders. How big did your company get? So let's say in 5 years before COVID, as it grew up, did you get towards 5 or 10 million euro, and like a maturing kind of vertical software company?
Oh, so 5 years before COVID, so then we're talk about,
No, yeah, 5
20.
years. So like you 5 years into the business when COVID hit in 2020.
Mhm.
How big was your business?
Ooh, I have to say I don't have the
Mm.
numbers, straight, but,
Yeah, but like, did you have 10 employees or 50 by then, or?
no, I think around 40, I would say.
Okay,
That's a good
great.
size, yeah.
Right. And, so you were up and running. You had real customers and you learned a lot in your product work. What was the main, um, yes, you building your product and it works and you maybe raising prices and figuring out how to sell to different customers. But the bigger challenge there is getting to, getting revenues going and across a more complicated European multilingual market. What was your main go-to-market motion that, got you up and running? Was it the word of mouth spread in the network or?
Yeah. Yeah, it was 100% the inbound, sales. That was our GTM. So word of mouth, trade shows were important for us in the early
Mm,
days. There were quite some specialized, trade shows.
yeah.
Um and we were always very particular in the ICP that we chose. So when we put it big on
Ah,
our website, and I think people recognize themselves, and that came from people came from there. But yeah, word of mouth was number one. Trade shows, and I think
okay.
that's about the full marketing mix. Yeah.
Okay, great. And so even in this big niche, you're talking about an ICP. How many rental companies are there in the world? Do we say 100,000 or something like that?
Yeah,
Or I
I
don't know.
wish I know. Like
Yeah.
at some point, I thought we had them all in the Netherlands, but they keep coming.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, that's still a question we have unanswered.
Yeah.
But the ICP also grew within the times, right? So it first started with Dutch companies, small Dutch rental companies. Then it started like small European rental companies. Then we made the company sizes bigger, and then we say, okay, it's not only the AV rental companies, but we also do the catering and the tents and the generators,
Aha.
etc. And then we
All the rentals.
realized,
Yeah.
that also the broadcasting during COVID with the cameras was also a very similar business. So that ICP developed over time,
Right.
and we tried to keep up with the software with that pace as well.
Okay. So you had a narrow focus and you started to just step up in serving
Exactly.
another
Yeah.
part of
Yeah. Our ICP
customer.
was way smaller, let's say 5 years ago than it is now. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So let's talk about COVID. Did that instantly kill the festival and live event business in Europe and wherever you were serving?
Yeah, so from one day or the other, we saw the usage on our platform completely halting. Like there was a bug in our in
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
monitoring tools.
Yeah.
Like it,
Uh-huh.
yeah, every day that in those countries they announced they stop, we immediately saw a drop there. Uh, some countries came with subsidiaries from the government to
Uh-huh.
retain, and and with that money they were able to still continue our subscription. But
Hmm.
that was not the case in all countries. So the difference between countries were quite big. Especially Italy, we got a very hard drop in the
Right.
beginning.
Yeah.
So we were every day hoping for the governments to support the event industries.
Yeah.
We were a bit lucky, of course, that all the data of those companies was on our platform, so it's not the first thing they dropped.
Uh-huh.
But we had a usage-based subscription, so they could they come from 10 users to 1 user, and that all happened in the first, let's say, 3 months, where everybody downgraded to the minimum they could downgrade to.
Right. So you have modules plus users. It's not a
Yeah,
number of events that you're
yeah.
supporting.
So
It's
yeah,
okay.
so especially back in the day, it was user-based plus modules indeed.
So that must have been very scary, as it was for any industry, restaurants, hotels, or whatever, software that was instantly impacted. And you had 40 employees there, 40 m- mouths to feed and families and so forth here. How did that? How did you deal with that? Obviously, no founder had dealt with that one like that before, but did you have to scale back your employees and like your
Yeah, so
customers?
we were lucky enough that we could keep the majority of them. I think we in the end didn't have that many layoffs.
Hmm.
We first secure a loan
Oh,
basically
okay.
in the first month, so that gave us some headroom to
Was
see.
that through a local bank or
That was
the
that was
Dutch
through
government?
a specialized program from the Dutch government,
Okay.
especially for COVID. So
Yeah.
companies
Okay.
that got hit by COVID were able to secure a loan.
Hmm.
So we were able to settle out the dust with that, and then we saw the whole industry was changing. That everybody needed streamings, right? So
Yeah.
all physical events or meetings were now digitalized, and so there was a big market of live streaming events. New companies that were previously in the event space started their own studio, and we were able to ride that wave and recover some revenue um,
Yeah.
in a period.
Did that, I mean, you quickly pivoted and added this new thing. Your customers were moving to online quickly to
Yeah.
to put on events,
Yeah,
but
so it's also like we pivot along with our customers, so our customers also pivoted more in that industry, so that made it also logical for us to
yes,
pivot with them in that new
right,
way of working.
right. So, and what was the scariest moment for you during COVID? I mean, not knowing how long it's going to last, or getting a loan from the government that you have to repay, or seeing your customers, some go out of business and other things like that. What was scariest for you?
Yeah, I think the beginning when everything went down so fast, that was really scary. And dealing with all the emotion of the customers,
Yeah,
where they also saw their life work, like being insecure of what's gonna happen. I think that made a very challenging time also for our support people. Conversations were just different back then,
yeah,
and also keeping the morale in the team while
yeah, yeah,
everybody was had to deal with all those emotions of our
yes,
customers, but we still need to get our invoices paid. We were not at one place, right? Everybody was remote, so how
huh,
can we get that morale up while everybody is working? Those were challenging times,
yeah,
and then there were times when we look at the number, it's like, okay, how are we gonna get this done?
yeah,
But in the end, it worked out.
right. So a year later, things started opening up, and I don't
Yeah,
know.
and government subsidies came, supporting programs came. Those companies got some funding or compensated by the government, were able to at least keep the base prices of our software.
Hmm.
And so we saw some perspective. And then at some point, that's also the new reality, right? So in the beginning, the same with AI. AI now, in the beginning, everything changes, and you need to really wrap your head around. Okay, what does it mean for us? And at some
Hmm.
point, you start to get some ideas, and you start to build some theories, and it starts to crystallize. Okay, I see these three ways how it could go. Let's bet on one of them, or
Yeah,
let's see if that's the way forward.
yeah, great. Well, we'll talk about AI in a minute here, but you got to the other side of COVID, I guess started growing again a little bit, and in 2024 closed your growth equity round with Expedition Capital. Were you looking to raise capital? You were not in the community. You're not talking to VC investors. You survived COVID, and I started growing again. How did that materialize?
Yeah, so we realized there were some new bets that really were costly, right? So again, we came into COVID with only the live event as a customer, and now we're also doing media. So we realized marketing was more expensive.
Mm.
Also within that period, we start to grow in the US, and then we realized,
Uh-huh.
okay, the US growth also needs some funding. So there were cases for money more than we had before. We were taking multiple bets at the same time, and also the personal part where we saw everything going down. We felt
Yeah.
okay, a bit of secondary um, will help us not to be in in the situation again.
Yeah. So did you talk to investors, or did they just knock on your door and say, this is really interesting, we'd like to invest? That's
Yeah.
generally how growth equity works. They show up and they get enough of knowledge about your business to say, here's an offer, you could take some money out of off the table. And it's kind of a surprise to most founders who didn't grow up thinking about this was a way to do it.
Yeah, so already, I think since we got a bit bigger, my LinkedIn and my email was on a day-to-day basis full with
Yes,
people reaching out, "Hey,
I
can we
see.
get a
Right.
coffee?"
Yes, there we go.
So at some point, and I always ignore them, and because I was building that thing, and at some point, I was like, let's start accepting those calls. Let's drink some coffees.
I see.
And so then I had those coffees. In those coffees, my main purpose was try to understand, okay, what is important for you? How are you in the game? What do you want to see from us? How do you see such a process? So try to get answer on all those questions. And then from those basically those coffees, we got to a long list, get a bit more intense process with
Yeah.
them where we shared some more
Okay.
numbers.
Yeah.
Then a short list, and then already in that short list, expedition tried to came with a offer quite fast.
Yeah.
Came with a term
Okay.
sheet, trying
Yeah.
to force us to
Yeah.
go that route.
Preemptive. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was that's also a word I learned later. Uh, um, but I think we still run a process with some other firms. We pass their offer. We thought, okay, if they will bring us something now, they will probably still do it in a few months from now, right? Not that much will change. So if we get an offer this fast, we will probably get another offer. So we still run a quick process. Then we
Yeah.
ended
Okay.
with three other term sheets,
Okay.
and then we chose expedition where we really I think you have multiple ways to look at these term sheets. You can look at the numbers, you can look at evaluation. That's a big part, but I think what's often overlooked is the other term, and I think the other terms are as important as the evaluation because it really
Totally agree.
determines
Yeah.
the way how you work together.
It's the
So I
hidden
think
thing. We just hear the number, but there's all kinds of terms,
yeah,
liquidation preferences and board seats
yeah,
and all
100%.
this kind of thing.
And
So
if and from my perspective, where I stand now, I think these terms might even be importanter than the more important
yeah.
than the valuation.
Hmm.
And so we did the
What
majority
was
of
a
the
term
negotiation.
that was very important to you? You got to understand their game and really figure out if you could get some alignment. But what was important for you besides the overall valuation? Like, what was the most important thing?
Well, I think in essence, you are negotiation the amount of autonomy that you have, right?
Yes. Hmm.
That's basically what it's about.
Yeah.
And then you indeed board seats who make certain decisions. What are you able to? What are the decisions that they need a majority of the votes for?
Hmm.
Um, and I think we were able to, based on all the important parts, that we get 100% autonomy on our side, and um, that's what we prioritize basically.
But now you're in a different game, Mr. Bootstrapper. You have a board, right? You have investors with the skin in the game, right? And advisors that tell you the you have an expectation that you're going to grow the business, and the investors are going to get paid back in 3 to 5 times in 3 to 5 years is what most growth equity says. And you were comfortable with all of that, right? You weighed all of this and you said, I can get comfortable with it.
Yeah, but I think what we earlier discussed, this journey where you develop yourself, things you were very uncomfortable with, let's
Hmm.
X years ago, doesn't mean that you're uncomfortable with it right now, right? So I
Yeah.
think right now it's a quite a natural thing to look at the company from that perspective, and it's also for me what I want to do, right? I want to see what it takes to build
Hmm.
to do this company X3 and what it needs to be, what requires from me to develop and how I
Right.
need to be. Yeah.
Great. What is your vision for the software? If you align with growth equity partners and take investment, you're going to say we're going to be a bigger company and we'll sell another part of it so you can get paid back. There's an expectation from investors. Does this mean that you're going to grow from a 15 to a 30 million euro software company or something like that? Or do you have a how do you how do you frame the vision in your own words?
Yeah. So when we did the investment, we were closer to
Okay.
around 8 million, right? And then I think the goal that so we set a path towards 30 to 50 million AR.
Okay. And so you've almost doubled in a year and a half since taking the funding? Something like that? Great. Well, that's very exciting. And can you say that some of the funding helped you move faster? You had, investments you knew would pay back pretty quickly. Is that already showing, that you could invest, or are you still looking at what the investments are as things are picking up?
Well, we certainly took more risk in
Yes.
hiring,
Okay.
and I
There you
think
go.
a lot of those risks pay off already. Not
Okay.
only monetized but also in reduced stress, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That it's nice to work with such a senior team as we have today.
Hmm. Okay. Great. Um, how do you see AI coming into your industry? You know this industry well. You know your this all the use cases in your product technology. Um, what's your current view of AI? One of those things you could see it going multiple ways. And are you testing or betting big, or you know, are your
So
customers demanding some AI, or do they care?
yeah, what I read today, and I don't know who the quote is, but somebody said that AI is like teenage sex. So everybody talks about it, but nobody really knows how to do it,
Yeah.
and everybody thinks everyone else is doing it, so
Yeah, that's
everybody
right.
claims they're doing it too.
That's a good
And I
one.
think we are really,
That's a good
really in
one.
the early days. It is very powerful. And there are quite some theses where we think it should go, how it will affect software development,
Yeah.
um, and what it means for our competitive edge, right? So if everybody can make software way faster as we think where it's going, what does it mean for us? And
Hmm.
for us, that means that we need to double down on being that ecosystem, right? We're not only the
Uh huh.
software, but we're the network. We are where the information is. I think that helps us on the
Right.
competitive edge.
Yes.
Um, so I
Are you
think that
using AI in your development, in your customer support, in your marketing and,
yeah, yeah,
operations of the business to,
yeah.
improve and move faster?
For sure, I think every department uh, is try to understand what AI means. Some departments have more success with that than others, right?
Mhm,
I think right now it is going so fast that the majority of the change have to come from the people that needs that are working, right? So
mhm,
we cannot force AI from the top.
mhm,
Something that's possible today is probably was not possible yesterday, and the people that are accountable for certain results, these are the ones that need to try every day. Okay, what can I do today to help get those results faster with the help of AI?
mhm.
Some things where we already see quite some success is on the categorization and information uh,
Ah,
sharing, right? So when we have negative NPS, AI is quite good in helping us understand what are things that customers said in previous interaction that will explain that negative NPS.
mhm,
That is something that's giving us a lot of insight already. Of course, we have the
mhm.
obvious things like chatbots.
Yeah,
I think we have a 20% deflection rate of our support team by AI. Um,
oh, great,
and we have the software development team being more productive.
okay, great.
We have some features in the software itself, but I think it's really really early days, and yeah, it can go
Yeah,
everywhere from here.
right. You mentioned NPS, Net Promoter Score, a modern way to track customer satisfaction. I read on your website, you put it out there quite prominently that you have very high customer satisfaction. Your customers love your product, and presumably you have, let's say, radically low churn, ERP software that runs your business that they actually like to use. I mean, where are you with churn and customer satisfaction these days?
Yeah, so like you said, the majority of our GTM is word of mouth. Word of mouth only works if you have a high NPS, right?
Hmm.
NPS is one of the two metrics that we really have front and center in the company, and that literally is the case when you walk in the door. The first thing that you see is our NPS leaderboard with our
Hmm.
current NPS.
Hmm.
We strive to be NPS of 30.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a record for ERP almost. Like
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So some SaaS company think it's quite low, but if you look at from the ERP
Yeah.
perspective,
Hmm.
I think it's quite ambitious.
And
Um,
do you have very low churn because it's such a core system?
yeah, the challenge is the adoption phase, right? Also,
Ah,
with quite
right.
complex software, you have a migration process. So if they churn in the we're not implemented phase.
Hmm.
Um, so in that cohort, our churn is way different than when after a year.
Right. I'm sure AI could start to help in that as well, from processing,
Yeah,
categorizing, as you say.
yeah,
So
for
all of
sure,
that.
for sure.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very exciting story as you're growing this business, successfully. Do your neighbors and your family understand what you do in Utrecht there? I mean, you're maybe you're one of the bigger software companies in town, and it's not a normal thing to do out there, not too far from
Yeah.
Amsterdam.
Yeah, so luckily, one of my good friends also has a software company that is a bit bigger than
Yeah,
mine.
great, great. Yeah,
so
there you go. Great.
so if we go on holiday together, we understand each other, uh, and yeah, majority of my friends have a entrepreneurial background, so
Yeah,
we talk about what it takes to run a business, and I'm
that's
not
great.
sure if a software company is as different as when you run an electrical company.
Uh-huh.
You have the same amount of. Uh, it's all about the people, right? Your success comes and goes with the people, and it doesn't really matter if you have a traditional company or a software company. It's hiring the right people, growing the team, setting the right culture. Don't think a software company is different there than any other company.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, those are laws of gravity that won't be defied. Maybe when we don't have employees, we have AI agents, maybe the things will be different. But
Yeah, for
until
sure.
then,
Yeah.
yes, that's great. Well, congratulations on a successful journey so far. And you're growing yourself as a CEO as your company grows and your regions grow and your uh,
ICP.
solutions grow. And, you're getting ready for the AI revolution that's coming. That's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to
Um,
it.
and I ask founders and CEOs on the podcast here, what is the most typical advice that you offer to practical founders out there who are building software companies, maybe for their own industry, maybe not, in Europe these days? So, which is different than Silicon Valley, which is different than the rest of the United States, which is different than the UK. Um, what's your most common advice for European SaaS founders? And there are many.
So I think when it comes to the typical bootstrap founders, I think that's what your question is about. I think then you have to make sure that so you're gonna have a lot of problems, right? So it's not gonna be easy, a lot of problems can be solved with money, but if you don't have that, you are yourself the person that needs to fix it. And I think the only way to not give up after the 100 setback is that you really do something that you really enjoy. And I think it might be
Uh,
the biggest cliche ever, but
uh-huh.
so I really like this path, this growth, this getting to the next step. And if this wasn't 100% my thing, I would have given up. I think after the first 20 people.
Hmm.
Um, so if you
Well,
ask
Steve
yourself, is this
Jobs
really
gave
what I
that
want?
advice, 30 years ago, I think it was, right? If you don't love what you do, you're going to give up because it's way harder than people imagine. It's not a normal kind of thing, but you can say that from personal experience, right? It's a continuous problem. AI is going to create new problems. You got over COVID and the 100 problems before that. So uh, that's awesome advice. Thanks for sharing your story on the Practical Founders podcast of Rentman, Roy. What an exciting business.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks for watching this week's interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly in-depth interviews with serious software founders who are building valuable software companies without big funding. You can check out my blog, all the podcast episodes, and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com. Or message me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. See you next week.